on my part. Number 4 for me, I have Ben Wallace 4. I have Ben Wallace at 4. One of, I mean, clearly the best defensive players of all time. Great shot blocker. Really the anchor of those mid-2000s defenses. Like, Chauncey gets a lot of praise, I think, for those Detroit Pistons teams, to not take it away from Chauncey. But without Ben Wallace, that team is not winning an NBA championship. I think we can, like, agree with that. Like, all-time level of defender. Insane, like, motor, like, consistently, something you really never had to worry about with Ben Wallace. I have him and I almost spoiled my number 3, but him and my number 3, I was going back and forth the entire time, and I kind of solidified it here while we were, talking about the super chats. But yeah, Ben Wallace for me is number 4.
I have Ben Wallace at number 4 as well, and I think his post defense was really underrated. Also, throughout a 4-year span, he led the league in rebounds, and I think it was at about 13 and a half a game throughout those 4 years. So I think standing at 6'9" as well, he was such a great rebounder, such a great shot blocker, great post defender. I think he did really good in the pick and roll. So, and you alluded to this as well, just having that motor game in and game out to where he's going to give his all defensively and be the forefront of this defense, that's extremely valuable as well. So I think having somebody that is going to be guarding you and is going to consistently outwork you and outplay you is really intriguing.
Ben Wallace was my number 2. He was my number 2.
Okay.
Ben, I'm very high on Ben Wallace. I think I don't even know where to start. I think, first of all, people overlook the fact that he was 6'7", 6'8", so he wasn't like this big presence, but he had actually. I totally forgot about him when we talked about.
He might be the most explosive.
I was just going to say that when we talked about the Dwight leaping, Ben Wallace skipped my mind. Like, if you watch Ben Wallace 2-foot leap off the floor, no dip in the legs at all, just explode up to the rim. Absurd, man. Ben Wallace's vertical pop was insane. He also had freakishly long arms. He was ridiculously strong with that center of gravity that allowed him to, like, match up with forwards or bigs in a way that a lot of these other guys couldn't and get pushed around. I think Ben Wallace benefited a lot from the fact that the Pistons during that time probably had the most versatile front court ever. The Ben Sheed, Tayshaun Prince, like 3-headed, we can all switch everyone, cover everything, rangy. I think he benefits a lot from that, and it probably makes his impact numbers look a little bit better than they otherwise would be. But those impact numbers are like GOAT tier, like the plus minus stuff. It's absurd. I think all-time shot blocker, great hands, could get hands on the ball and in passing lanes and stuff like that, could switch pretty much across the board in an era where that was more of a luxury than it otherwise would be. The big thing that hammers the point home for me is, one, the Pistons during that like 5-year run or whatever were just like at worst a top 5 defensive stretch of all time as a team. Like regular season, playoffs, versatility, there was nothing you could do to take them out of their comfort zone. Then in 2007, Ben Wallace joins the Bulls.
Best defense in the league.
The best defense in the league, and it was not even the same Ben Wallace. And it was like, okay, that clearly proved to us that you were the head of the snake. Like, you were the guy that pulled it all together. And yeah, so my thing is, like, you look at any signal, right? Like team defense, you look at like how the team performed with and without a guy. You split up the lineup data. Like, Ben Wallace just passes every test with flying colors. And then in an era where, yes, rim protection and size was the most valuable thing, he gave you that and more. He gave you so much more that the Pistons rode the backs of and then just like did whatever they wanted. Like they could trap. They were like, they would always trap the ball. And it's like, you can do that because you have a 6'7" guy behind the play that's going to cover everything. And yeah, so I think Ben Wallace is just like, I think 1 through 4, they all have a claim for number 1, and it's just splitting hairs. But Ben Wallace, to me, gets the edge. I had him at number 2.
I think the thing that impresses me the most about Ben Wallace is part of it is winning bias, but part of it is just he was so dominating defensively. He escaped the stigma that comes with being a great defensive player while being the worst offensive player I've ever seen. Rudy Gobert has not escaped it. He gets, in my opinion, he gets criticized more on defense because of how bad his offense is. Ben Wallace doesn't deal with that. And he was a nightmarish offensive player. But defensively, I think you alluded to it. The ability that he had in an era that didn't call for it, but when he needed to, he could. And he was really good at it, to switch and guards in space. And like, he's ripping guards in the open court. Like, he's ripping them. And he's taking it coast to coast, and it looks terrible while he does it, but he does it. But like, I do think there's a trade-off there. Sometimes I do think he was a bit over aggressive, like in terms of pick and rolls. Like sometimes he'll step out and try and like blitz a ball handler and he'll end up giving up a roll and stuff. But then that's what you deal with Rasheed Wallace sliding over and now he's protecting the rim. But that's the 04 Pistons were a ridiculous defense. But I think similar to what you said, the thing that really hammered it home was what he did in 07 in Chicago. Turning that, and that's not just the best defense in the league. That's one of the best defensive regular seasons like ever.
Yeah,
in terms of how good that Chicago defense was, and Ben Wallace is at the forefront of that. And I think as a pure rim protector, he was elite. As a defensive rebounder, he was elite. In terms of versatility, schematically, and in terms of switchability, he was the best in the league or second best in the league at the time.
Before we move any further into this video, I want to say thank you to Tyler and Sean for joining the Hoop Talk podcast on this episode and having a very good conversation of the greatest defenders post 2000. Depending on the time you guys are watching this video, they will be back up on Sunday to talk about the greatest offensive players in NBA history. So yes, we're going to be talking about some of your favorite offensive players for maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, or if this episode is going to be anything like Nerd Sessions episode, it might even be 3 hours. Tyler and Sean's YouTube channel, the Hoop Venue Podcast, will be in the description below. Once again, thank you guys for watching and thank Tyler and Sean for coming onto our platform. Now, let's get back into the video.
Never foul.
There was no defensive issue with Ben Wallace. Like he's playing heavy minutes in the regular season and playoffs, 40 minutes a game, and he's fouling like twice.
Yeah,
like he doesn't do anything wrong. Like
listen to this. In the 2003 playoffs, the Pistons played 17 games. Ben Wallace averaged 16 rebounds, 2.5 steals, and 3 blocks with 2.9 fouls. Like, bro, what is that stat line?
He's a ridiculous.
And the motor, like you mentioned, the motor, bro. Like, and the intimidation.
To be fair, he had no choice but to have a 100% motor on defense. He had no choice.
We didn't even talk about the intimidation factor, though. Like Ben Wallace was terrifying for opposing offensive players. He was so scary.
He was wearing headbands on his arms. Ben Wallace was a ridiculous defender. I can definitely see the case for number 2. I think you actually made a really compelling case for number 2.
Yes, you did.
Where's Ben for you?
I would have him at 3. Have him at 3.
Okay.
But I think Tyler did a good job of maybe talking me into number 2, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna stick to my guns and say number 3. But I'm gonna ask John D, who do you have at number 3? That's what I'm gonna ask.
I got Draymond Green at number 3. I think Draymond is one of the smartest defenders the league has ever seen, with his play recognition and just being able to anchor a defense and also make sure everyone around him is in the best spot to succeed on a night in, night out basis, and just being excellent on the perimeter and guarding the post really well at 6'6", 6'7", and also being able to guard out in space. I just think all of that stuff is extremely valuable. The play recognition, a lot of stuff that he does off the ball, you never really see on the box score, whether it's him just disrupting someone dribbling in passing lanes and then helping a guy that's guarding him one-on-one get the steal, or taking charges, or just being able to be effective night in and night out on any part of the floor consistently, and just like uplifting this defense a lot more to be a better defense than what you would really think. And Draymond Green did all of that at like 6'6" or 6'7", guarding the post, playing out in space, playing passing lanes. I think his IQ is amazing as well. So I had him at 3.
Highest defensive IQ ever.
I was gonna say Draymond was my 4. And I think he's the smartest defender ever. It kind of hurts because, like you said, Gobert is your litmus test guy. That's me with Draymond. It's like, how do you feel about Draymond? Let's find out what we're talking about here. I think he's the smartest defender ever. I think he's the hardest defender ever to probably scheme. Like, he is the game within the game. He embodies that. It's like, no matter what you do, like we talk about the Luka stuff, like where I talked about, like, you do this, I'm gonna do this, basketball supercomputer. Draymond is the defensive version of that. It's like whatever the offense tries to do, he's gonna recognize it and blow it up. He's always in the right spot at the right time. He also unlocked the versatility for the Warriors with the small ball 5 stuff. I think there's one thing that holds, like I said, I have to split hairs. I think Draymond checks every box except for the fact that of this group of 4, he's the only one that I don't think could be a full-time 5 for a 4-round playoff run. I think like you need that other guy, like that Bogut, that JaVale McGee, that Kevon Looney. You need that other guy in it to help him with rebounding and to help him with rim protection. And I think that's just the one hang up. But besides that, checks every box. Just absurd defender.
Yeah, you might have swung me on Ben Wallace being a little higher on my list.
Yeah, Ben Wallace and Draymond was the confliction for me. I didn't know.
And that's the thing for me. They have similar body styles. Ben Wallace is a little bit taller, but Ben Wallace is so much more explosive and so much of a better rebounder that you just get that full-time 5 stuff.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like you said, that was definitely the confliction. I had Draymond 3, and like I said, like I had them like back and forth the entire time. And like Tyler having his great point about Ben Wallace, like didn't make it any easier.
Okay.
But like, look, man, Draymond Green is like the smartest defensive player of all time.
Yeah.
Where any action he can blow up, and it doesn't matter. So like if you're a quarterback in football, like you have to have your pre-snap read. Like before you hike the ball, you have to have your pre-snap read, and then you have your post-snap read. Like after the ball is hiked, 2 different reads. Draymond Green is the best example of like an elite NFL quarterback, but put on a basketball floor where I know exactly what's about to happen before you even start running, organizing your set or running your offense. And then once it happens, I'm already there 2 steps ahead of you. Then if you try to like neutralize and skip the ball out or do anything like that, Draymond's recovery speed in terms of closing out, but also being able to defend and contain the drive still at the same time is generational. I don't know if he gets credit for his rim protection enough. I think he's like perfectly like fine compared to the rest of this guys here. I think it's pretty easy to say he's the worst rim protector out of these top 4, but I don't say that like in a disparaging way. Like he is a very, very capable rim protector, especially in playoff settings where you see an uptick in rim protect in shot blocking production and things of that nature. The argument for Draymond is undersized dude, but supercomputer processing, and just I said Bam was the king of versatility over the past so many years. Draymond Green is the actual king. Like he is the best, most versatile defender of the past 15 years, ever since his prime started, basically. And
I think. Sorry, I go ahead. I don't want to cut
you off. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I kind of want to go against my own argument for a second and mention like what he lacks in rim protection, he so much makes up for in versatility because I think there were things you could do with Draymond that you couldn't do with any. Actually, there's one other guy you could do him with that we haven't gotten to yet. But there were things you could do with Draymond that you can't do with any other defender from this era. And it's like people forget that there was a playoff series in Portland where he was the primary defender on Damian Lillard. He was the primary defender on Lillard. And it's like this is our defensive anchor going out and guarding Damian Lillard. And then you have him guarding Jokic just a few years later and like doing a good job on Jokic. And it's like, Draymond's versatility. Also, another thing that's underrated, most of these guys elevate their team's defense by cleaning up their mistakes. Like you look at like Ben Wallace, for example. If Billups gets beat on the perimeter, Wallace is going to be there to protect the rim. Draymond being one of, if not the loudest communicator ever is such a big deal because he squeezes the best possible defense out of everyone on the court. Like the way Wiggins completely transformed as a defender and the way he like ingrained in Steph. Like Steph has like the supercomputer defensive technique down as a help defender because he's spent his entire career with Draymond. So it's like Draymond elevates his defensive players in a way that probably only one other guy does in this list.
Yeah, Draymond's is I was struggling. Everyone in my top 4 I played with up to number 1. Like I didn't know where I was going to go with it. But the thing that impressed me the most, and this is something like I was doing research for this, in the years preceding Kevin Durant and then with Kevin Durant, like all included, every lineup with Draymond Green in the postseason was an elite defensive unit. Every lineup without him was egregiously bad on defense. And I didn't know this. Like Draymond, Clay, and Steph, and this is 1,400 minutes from 15 to 19, a 104 defensive rating. Draymond and Clay, 102. Draymond and Steph, 103. Like you do Draymond and KD, it was somehow 87. but very small sample, just those two, but 8 to 7. But like, and then every lineup without Draymond Green, it was bad. Like, I'll read you the numbers for anyone who's interested. The numbers with KD, Steph without Draymond on the floor, 109. Steph and KD without Draymond, 117. Clay and Steph without Draymond, 110. Clay, Steph, and KD without Draymond, 115. Like, whatever lineup assortment you have without Draymond Green, they're not an elite defense. You put Draymond on there, they're one of the best playoff defenses we've seen. And
his
that's
longevity too is like also kind of underrated.
He was the best defender in the league, in my opinion, in 2016. Then was the best defender in the league again in 2022.
Yeah,
like we're 7 years apart, and he's the best defender in the league in 2 separate years.
He's still probably top 10 again, like still, even though like Golden.
Yeah, the issue now with Draymond is sometimes he takes some plays off, and sometimes like he's too smart for me to think that he's like missing assignments. Like, so I just think he's taking plays off, but like you're seeing these errors start to rack up a bit more with Draymond, and the rim protection has fallen off a lot.
The thing for me with Draymond is like whenever it's a big game, he's right back to his prime self. Like that Dallas game, that was like peak Draymond.
Yeah,
he could still, and if the Warriors make the playoffs again, I expect to see Draymond be an elite defender again. So he's still at that level. The only thing that's really tapered off is the consistent motor in the regular season and just in general the rim protection. Now I think he needs a 5 next to him more than ever. I just think his individual rim protection has fallen off. But since we spoke about Draymond, now I'm convincing myself he's better than Ben Wallace. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. But we are getting into, well, we've got Tyler's number 2, but so actually, Tyler, who do you have at number 3? That's what.
Yeah, my number 3 is Tim Duncan. I think that Spurs. Okay, if I considered longevity, he'd probably be number 1. That Spurs dynasty was like 20 years of elite defense. It just never slipped, and that was Duncan. I think the argument for actually the 2004 Spurs too, the year after David Robinson retired,
regular season defense ever, I believe.
Yeah, the best regular season defense ever, and it was the year Robinson retired. I think Duncan's ability to switch between the 4 and 5 is underrated. I think it's also underrated that he came into the league as a 3. People don't remember that. Tim Duncan was a 3 in his rookie year, guarding perimeter players. So Duncan had versatility. To me, the argument for Duncan is really as simple as that's what Rudy Gobert would look like if he played in the constraints of the 2000s without having to cover all that space. Like perfectly disciplined, never makes errors, elite rebounder and shot blocker who can kind of switch when needed. I just think Duncan was like a pretty perfect defender in terms of just like discipline and execution with like the size and absurd length. And it was just so easy to build an elite defense around him.
Yeah, Tim Duncan, he led 14 top 3 defenses. Like, you're just not going to get that anywhere else. Like, I don't want to spoil it, but I value the longevity a lot. So
okay, I'll put him in at number 1 for you. Don't worry.
Yeah, appreciate that. But his timing when it came to blocking shots, like somebody could drive, pump fake. I'm not going anywhere. Now I know you're about to jump, so I'm about to block the shot. Perfect timing. Once again, you mentioned it with his versatility on the wing, the way he was able to use his feet to really put himself in the best position and flip his hips fast enough to where he can cut off a driving lane and force someone to take an uncomfortable shot. A lot of those things I was really high on, and he had points in his career where he was an elite help side defensive player, and that was his main focus. Elite post-up defensive player, and that was his main focus. He played out to the perimeter a lot. And if you're asking me, you're asking me to get a top 5 to top 7 defense for the span of 20 years or however long he played. I think it was 19 or 20 years. I would take that. I would take that 100% of the time because I think he was an all NBA team or all defensive team like in the last 2 or 3 years of his career. Like to be able to anchor an elite defense throughout your entire career, even in your last years at 36 or 37 years old, I value a lot. So if you're telling me with player A, you're going to get 20 years of elite defense and he's going to be at the forefront of it, I would take that. So that's why I had him at number 1.
Dude, he was on the all NBA team in his 18th season.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like he was ridiculous, man. He was ridiculous.
So I have Tim Duncan 2 on my list. But again, you're really splitting hairs with all 4 of these guys. I think obviously, like John mentioned, the longevity argument is one of, if not maybe the best argument you can make for Tim Duncan. Like you don't even have to get to anything he does skill related on the defensive end of the floor. It's the fact that 14 top 3 defenses over his career.
Top 3 defenses.
and the fact that he was still like an A level defender in his like last years, which by the way was barely a decade, not even a decade ago technically. Like it was 2016, his last year. Like to say that in your age 38 season you're still an A level defender because of your perfect technique and discipline, that's something that like holds a lot of gravity in my opinion. I have to get this off. It's a miracle and maybe even a bit of a joke that arguably, like if you add in the entire, not even going to go that, one of the top three, I think consensusly top three defender of the 21st century, never winning a defensive player of the year is a joke.
It's a crime. It's a
so
crime.
Stupid.
What's even worse is in a half of those years, Bruce Bowen, his own teammate, was finishing above him in the voting.
It's a crime. It's a crime.
and not to cut you off, maybe that's an argument that you go that is like can be made against Tim Duncan in his placement, is that he played for the beginning of his career next to David Robinson, and he did have just in general other great defensive talent around him. But at the end of the day, like he still was the anchor for consistently top three defenses. So yeah, Tim Duncan's my number two.
You know what's underrated about Duncan too is his block rate consists come playoff time. Like if you look at those like playoff numbers, he was a guy who would get like 2.5 blocks in the regular season, getting like 3 or 4 over like long playoff runs. Like in the 2002 playoffs, he averaged 4.3 blocks. And in the next year, 03 playoffs, the iconic run, 3.3 blocks with 15 rebounds.
Pick one Duncan playoff run.
Pick one? You're saying pick one Duncan playoff run?
Yeah.
03. It's
okay.
I was gonna say that's a given. That was
not necessary. Well, yeah, it is. I don't know.
What are you going with? 2014?
Hey, respect 2014. That was good ball movement. But like Tim Duncan was like the antithesis of Dwight Howard in terms of every mistake Dwight Howard made, all the goaltends he committed. Tim Duncan was just the opposite. We didn't explode off the ground, but we targeted the ball low. We didn't swat shots out of bounds, but we kept them in bounds and we just retained the ball.
Yeah.
We didn't jump on up fakes. We felt no need to because we're cooler than you and we don't need to jump. Like in 2003, in the regular season, Tim Duncan committed 2 goaltends. 2. And that's also a consistent thing throughout his career where he's not committing any goaltends. In the playoffs, it was 0. Not a single goaltend that Tim Duncan committed. And this is with him being one of the best shot blockers of all time. So I struggled with what to do with Tim Duncan. The longevity of it is something I favor over my number one. But then the versatility that he provides and the motor and the communication and all of those things are things that I think I value more peak for peak. I don't know what to do. I'm gonna be honest. As I've been hearing you guys go through your top 4, I'm changing my list like as you guys speak. Like I think recently I just moved Draymond back above Ben Wallace. Like my list is changing currently. So I know that Sean and Tyler have KG number 1, spoiler, and I know John D has Tim Duncan number 1. I don't have a decision, so I'm gonna just let them go through their KG stuff before I make my decision. But just before we do that on Tim Duncan, the offense regressed after like year 8, year 9, but defensively, you guys have alluded to it. He was an elite defender till the day he left. Even in 2016, he was one of the best rim protectors in the sport. So that level of 19, I think it is 19 years of elite all defensive level value, while also providing you all-time defensive player of the year level value, despite what the voting may say. Bruce Bowen having the most second place finishes of all time is disgusting.
Talk about 2007.
Right now, I'm on the Duncan side of the fence. I'll say that. But I want to give you guys the floor. I'll start with Sean. Why is KG number 1?
Kevin Garnett is number 1, honestly, for all the reasons I kind of was talking about Draymond for, honestly. But
except he's 6'11".
Except he's 6'11". Except he's a far superior shot blocker. But in terms of the ability to diagnose things as it's happening, have near perfect help defense when needed, but also having some of the versatility and stuff just in a different era to where it maybe wasn't needed as much. Like he's 6'11" Draymond with like A+ rim protection, essentially. Like that's the argument. Tyler's like, is it your like Twitter handle KG is the GOAT?
Before I got suspended, it was KG's GOAT.
Right.
Yes. KG,
So I'll let you make the argument.
KG is my guy. I've watched more KG games than like any historic player. And my take is that he is elite shot blocking away from being just the best defender ever. Like that's literally there are two flaws. Well, I wouldn't even consider the rim protection a flaw, but like when we're splitting hairs, there are two things that Kevin Garnett isn't absolutely S tier at. It's shot blocking, and then it's like getting pushed around a little bit because he had a very lengthy frame.
Sure.
I'm of the belief that Kevin Garnett did the Kevin Durant thing to play a different position. I think Kevin Garnett was like 7'1". Like I think when you look at him against other centers and stuff, like I think Kevin Garnett is clearly, he also had like what, a 7'10" wingspan. So we talked about Wemby having like the freakiest physical tools. The only other guy who I'd put in that conversation is Kevin Garnett. Freakishly long arms, the agility of a wing, 7'1", has the communication and mind of Draymond. I almost think of him as like a hybrid between Draymond and Wemby. And I think when people look at Kevin Garnett, they think of like the Celtics years. They think of some of the late Minnesota years maybe. And they're like, yeah, he was a good power forward defender. Like he's a good weak side guy. He's a good rebounder. I think it gets overlooked just how versatile this guy was. Like I think one game that really stood out to me when I was watching back in the day, I want to say it was the 1997 playoffs. So this is kind of like before the 21st century, but just plays into my point. I want to say it was 97. They faced Houston in the first round. And you know what Kevin Garnett's role was on defense? To full court press Clyde Drexler. That's what he was doing. And they were full court trapping Clyde Drexler. Then you get to like 2003. Everyone talks about the series where Dirk torched KG. KG was guarding Steve Nash for half of those games. Why is the 7'1" power forward guarding Steve Nash effectively? Like Steve Nash was struggling to create anything. I think he is like the ultimate defensive chess piece in terms of like, I talked about it with Giannis kind of, but Kevin Garnett takes it all up to another notch. It's like he's going to switch. Not even the one wants to attack him on a switch, but then from the one, he's going to rotate across the court and block a shot at the rim or blow up an action. He's probably the rangiest athlete in NBA history in terms of like, I'm just going to teleport from the corner to the rim and I'm going to get there early because I have the Draymond sixth sense. So to me, it's basically just like, yeah, I admit that I'm definitely higher on KG than probably anyone in basketball history. But like in terms of just this guy was like, I'm especially thinking about him in this current era. Like if you were to go into a lab and craft like the ideal perfect defender, you would come out with like basically a variant of Kevin Garnett. And then on top of that, the consistency, the fact that Boston was a top defense up until 2013. And the fact that he started right away, he came in the league a teenager and was already like a 1-5 defender. I just think Kevin Garnett is like, I think if I were doing an all-time list, it'd be Bill Russell, Olajuwon, and then it'd be Garnett. And to me, it's just Garnett's just awesome, man.
Yeah, he's another one who came into the league as a 3. He was a Swiss Army knife on defense, and then he started playing the 4 and became one of the best defensive rebounders of all time. Very interesting.
Rebounding 4 straight years.
But I think the thing that I struggle with KG is because like I'm super high on KG, and I'm like I've been making the argument that I think Tim Duncan and KG are interchangeable just as players in general. Like I don't know who the better player is. And I think the thing that I guess leads me to that point is I do think I end up putting a bit of like modern day bias towards it, whereas like KG in today's game, I think would like undoubtedly be the more valuable player than Tim Duncan. And I think that plays maybe a bit too much into my opinion of KG because like back then he was still, in my opinion, the best or the second best defender in the league, and then Ben Wallace, so top 3 defender in the league. But his skill set was less valuable than maybe a Tim Duncan, who was a pure defensive anchor, who was an elite post defender. I think those were the areas that KG, I guess, lacked more so, where that post defense where he wasn't as great, or that pure rim protection where he wasn't as great, where he could just anchor the middle. But then you look at the versatility, you look at the switchability, you look at the amount of schemes you can deploy him in, you look at the motor, which I think is matched by no one. And then the longevity of it all is still amazing because like even after he tore his meniscus, just off pure intelligence, communication, and awareness, he was still an elite defender up until he got to Brooklyn. And even in Brooklyn, he was actually a good defender.
Like the first
I
year.
know we see like the washed KG memes in Brooklyn. Like even then, he was still a good defender. So it's like,
even the very last year that he ever played in Minnesota, him and Karl Anthony Towns on the court together were like a +7 net rating or something.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so like, and they had like an elite defense. Like Kevin Garnett with rookie Cat was an elite defense.
I think I don't know. I think I might lean towards KG for today. Tomorrow I might lean to Duncan. But like he was just so athletically gifted in terms of the amount of ground he could cover. And I think he did benefit from now you're not having to make closeout from 3-point line to the paint. It was 18 feet to the rim. So the closeouts were shorter and the distance he had to cover was shorter. But if there was anyone who you could rely on to cover that distance consistently, it was him. And the amount of times I'm seeing him pick up point guards, the amount of times I'm seeing him guard small forwards, the amount of times I'm watching him guard bigs, like he's one of the few legitimate 1 through 5 defenders in history. I know that label gets thrown around a lot, but he is him. Dennis Rodman could do it.
Yeah. Draymond.
I think Draymond could do it. I think those are the 4 off the top of my head. Bill Russell could go 1 through 5.
But that was like a fake 1 through 5.
Yeah, it was like, I guess. Like, cool. You got 1 through 5. Okay. But like, he's one of the few that could do it, is my point. So, yeah, today I'm gonna go with the KG side of it. Sorry, John, you're by yourself. But I don't think I think 1 through 4. I don't think there's a wrong answer, if I'm being honest. I think
I know.
Green case is easy.
I'm so glad we all had the same 4. That was like my big thing. I was like, I feel like there's a clear 4, and we all hit it. So
yeah,
I feel good about that.
Good work, guys. Good work.
You saying you didn't want to see Drew Holiday in my top 5?
I was ready for the Marcus Smart name drop, bro.
I'm glad we
got DPOY since '96.
I'm glad we all had like somewhat different lists, because I was fighting some serious allegations the last guest we had on with Nerd Sesh. Me and Carson had a very identical list. I was fighting some
it was more than suspicious, John. You was blatantly cheating.
But before
you messaged them before the show and said, "Hey, just give me your list." Is that what you did?
That's what it seemed like.
Before we leave, could I also name one more guy that was in my like group of 5 honorable mentions?
Mm-hmm.